My name is Evelyn Grace Morris. I am 74 years old, and I used to live in a white house with blue shutters and a front porch swing that creaked like an old lullaby. That house was my home for nearly 50 years. I baked birthday cakes in that kitchen. I danced with my late husband Harold in that living room. I watched my daughter Rebecca take her first steps on that hardwood floor. It was more than bricks and wood. It was where my life happened. But that was before I became a guest in my own story. Harold passed 7 years ago. Heart attack. One moment, he was reading the morning paper. The next, he was gone. Just like that. I remember the silence afterward. It was the kind of silence that doesn't go away. It lingers in the corners behind the photo frames, between the ticking of the clock. I tried to keep myself busy. Gardening, church, reading. But truth be told, a house that once felt full became too quiet to bear. That's when Rebecca called. She said they were going through a hard time. She had lost her job. Her husband, Mark, was struggling with some business venture. They needed a place to stay, just for a while. I didn't think twice. She's my daughter, my only child. Of course I said yes. Of course I opened my door. Of course I made up the guest room. I even bought her favorite cereal. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. She hugged me tightly. Mark gave me a nod. That was our first exchange. Just a nod. It seemed harmless then. They moved in with 2 suitcases and 6 boxes. That, just for a while, turned into weeks, then months. Rebecca would say they were getting back on their feet. Mark would say, "These things take time." I didn't complain. I made dinner every night. I washed the towels. I let them use my car. But slowly, things began to shift. Mark started making small comments, nothing direct at first. He'd say things like, "It's hard to get work done with all that TV noise." Or, "Why does she keep the house so cold?" Then he began rearranging things, moving the coffee table, storing boxes in my hallway, taking down some of my old pictures. One day I came into the kitchen and he had thrown out Harold's favorite mug, said it was cracked. I found it whole in the trash. Rebecca barely noticed. She was always tired, always quiet. When I brought it up, she just said, "Mom, he's just stressed. It's temporary." Temporary. That word started to sound like a lie. Then came the locks. Mark changed the password to the Wi-Fi. I wasn't told. When I asked, he said, "You don't really need it anyway, do you?" My own house. And I needed permission to check my email. The worst part. Rebecca started to pull away from me, too. She stopped joining me for tea. She stopped asking me how I was. It was like the more comfortable they got, the more invisible I became. One night I overheard them talking in the guest room. Mark said, "I can't keep living like this. This woman's routines, this depressing energy. She's a fard. We need space. Fard." That was the word he used. Like I was some unwanted object they had to carry. Like I wasn't the person who raised Rebecca with love, who stayed up all night when she had a fever, who worked double shifts to pay for her college, who cried happy tears at her wedding. A fard. I didn't confront them. I just sat in the dark kitchen and let the tears fall quietly into my cup of cold tea. But the final blow, It came on a Thursday morning. Mark walked into the kitchen, looked me in the eye, and said, "Evelyn, we've talked. This isn't working. We need the house to ourselves." I said nothing. Not because I agreed, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He added, "We'll help you find a place. There's a senior complex in town. A complex. For seniors. A cage for people they wanted to forget." I turned to Rebecca. I waited for her to speak, to defend me, to say, "No, this is my mother's house." But she said nothing. Her eyes stared down at her coffee mug. The same mug I gave her when she turned 12, with the words, "You are my sunshine," written on the side. She couldn't even look at me. That was the moment I realized I had already been erased. I spent the rest of that day in my bedroom, the same room where I once held Harold's hand and watched the sun rise through sheer white curtains. Now, the light felt different, colder, like it didn't belong to me anymore. Rebecca never came in to talk, not even a knock. I heard them laughing in the kitchen that night. Mark's voice loud and relaxed, hers light like wind chimes. They sounded like a couple who had just solved a problem. Only, I was the problem. I didn't sleep. I watched the shadows move across the ceiling, and I wondered how long it would take for a home to turn into a stranger's house. The next morning I got dressed early, put on my navy sweater, the one Harold liked. He used to say it matched my eyes. I made toast, but my hands trembled so much I dropped the butter knife. It clanged against the tile. Mark walked in, shirtless, and said, "You okay, Evelyn?" But not in a kind way, more like someone asking a neighbor's dog to stop barking. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man had sat at my table, eaten my food, lived under my roof, and now he was treating me like clutter. "I'm fine," I said, even though I wasn't. Later that day, Rebecca came to my room. She held a brochure in her hand. Pastel colors, big smiling faces of old people playing bingo. She said, "It's really nice, Mom. They have a garden and weekly movie nights. You'd be around people your age. People my age. Like I was a category." I didn't even look at the paper. I just asked her one thing. "Is this what you want?" She paused, bit her lip, and said, "I think it's what's best." Best for who? Not for me. Not for the woman who had poured her soul into this house, but for her. For him. I asked, where would I go in the meantime? Mark had already looked into it. He said, "There's a transitional unit. Short term. They have one bed left. A unit. As if I were some object being stored between locations." I sat down on the edge of my bed. My knees hurt. Everything hurt. But mostly, it was my heart. Because what they were really saying was that I didn't belong anymore. Rebecca said we could pack up that weekend. I asked if I could at least bring Harold's chair. She said there wouldn't be room. I didn't cry in front of her. I waited until she left. Then I opened Harold's drawer. It still smelled like cedar and aftershave, and I just sat there, hugging an old flannel shirt like it could somehow hold me together. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to leave quietly. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I still had dignity. And I deserved better than being pushed out like old furniture. The next day I called an old friend, Maggie. We used to teach Sunday school together. She'd moved 3 towns over after her husband passed. When I told her what happened, she didn't gasp. She didn't ask me if I was sure. She just said, "Pack your things. You can stay with me." That was the first kindness I had felt in weeks, so I packed. Not everything, just what mattered. A photo of Harold and me on our wedding day, my recipe box, 2 handmade quilts, and a small wooden bird Harold carved for our anniversary. Mark saw me with the suitcase and asked, "Leaving early?" I said, "Yes, but not for the place you chose." He shrugged, didn't even fake surprise. He just said, "Okay then." Rebecca didn't come downstairs to say goodbye. I waited by the door. 5 minutes. 10. But she never came. So I opened the door myself, walked down the porch steps, past the rose bushes I had planted, past the old mailbox Harold painted. I didn't look back. Maggie picked me up in her red station wagon. She gave me a hug so tight I felt my bones realign. We drove in silence for a while. Then she said, "You're not a burden, Evelyn. You're a blessing. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you." I cried in that car, not because I was sad, but because someone finally said what I needed to hear. Her house was smaller, but it was warm. She had a yellow cat named Pickles and a teapot that whistled like it was happy to be used. We shared dinners together, watched old movies, laughed, really laughed. And one afternoon, while sitting on her back porch, I realized something. I had been living for other people, holding space for people who never offered me any in return. And even though I had lost my house, I had found something else. My worth. I stayed with Maggie longer than I thought I would. Weeks turned into months, and with each day I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. It's strange how quickly a place becomes home when the people inside it see you. Really see you. Not as a burden, not as a problem, but as a person. We got into a rhythm, Maggie and I. She would make cinnamon toast in the mornings. I would set the table. Pickles the cat would jump into my lap, whether I liked it or not. We watched the seasons change through her living room window. The leaves fell like little flames. Snow came gently, blanketing the world like a hush. I crocheted. She gardened. We both read more books than we could count. And every Sunday we walked to church together. 2 silver-haired women arm in arm, laughing about something silly like the hymns being too slow or the preacher's new glasses. It wasn't perfect. Nothing is. Sometimes I still woke up in the middle of the night thinking I was in my old bedroom. I would reach for Harold's hand and feel only cold air. And sometimes my mind would wander back to Rebecca's face. I wondered if she missed me, if she felt guilt, if she ever told anyone what she'd done. But I didn't let those thoughts stay too long, because Maggie was right. I wasn't a burden. I was a person who had loved deeply, given generously, and I had survived heartbreak not once, but twice. Then one morning something unexpected happened. I received a letter, handwritten, no return address, just my name, written in shaky script. It was from Rebecca. She said she was sorry, said she had made a terrible mistake, that she had let her husband poison her mind, and convince her that my presence was a problem, when really, he was. She wrote that Mark had left, packed his things, and disappeared. She found out he had been cheating, that he had taken money from her account without telling her. She was alone now, broken, and in her words, haunted by what she had done to me. She asked if I would ever forgive her, said she didn't expect to come back into my life. But that, she wanted me to know she saw it all clearly now. I read the letter twice, 3 times, and I cried. Not because I was angry, but because it was the first time I'd felt like maybe my daughter had remembered who I was, who I had been to her. Still, I didn't reply right away. Forgiveness is not a switch you flip. It's a slow process, like thawing ice, and I had just started to feel warm again. Maggie saw me reading it and asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" I told her I didn't know what I wanted. She smiled and said, "You don't owe anyone an answer, but if it brings you peace, then maybe it's worth it." So I waited a week. Then I wrote back. I didn't say everything, but I said enough. Told Rebecca that I was healing, that I didn't hate her. But I needed time. And most importantly, that my worth did not depend on her apology, but on how I chose to live now. I mailed it, felt lighter, and something shifted. I began volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children on Thursday mornings. They would sit cross-legged in a circle, eyes wide, listening to tales about dragons and princesses and magical trees. One little girl, Anna, asked if I was a grandma. When I told her I wasn't anymore, she hugged me and said, "Well, you can be mine." I smiled so hard I thought my face would crack. Funny, isn't it? How love finds us in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes through letters, sometimes through little arms around your waist. Maggie watched me bloom like one of her roses. She said I was glowing, said I looked taller, said my laugh had returned to its full volume. One afternoon we sat on her porch drinking lemonade and watching the sun dip low. She asked, "Do you think you'll ever move back?" I thought about it, about that house, those walls, those memories. "No," I said. That house forgot me. But I remembered myself, because here's the truth. We spend so much of our lives building for others, sacrificing, shrinking, giving and giving, until we forget what it feels like to simply exist for ourselves. But there's life after heartbreak. There's light after loss. I lost my husband. Then I lost my home. But I found friendship. I found forgiveness. And most of all, I found myself. If you're listening to this and you feel invisible, forgotten, discarded, I want you to know something. You are not a burden. You are not too much. You are not too old, too quiet, too soft, too anything. You are still here.